All right, today's lesson is on topic 4 called Wearing Your Genes. So we are starting to look at the genetics part of this unit. We will break it up into 2 parts. So our first part, we will cover genetics, heritability. We'll talk about dominant and recessive traits. And then the second part of the lesson, we'll get into the nature versus nature or nature versus nurture concepts, and then also we'll talk about mutations and cancer. So genetics, it is the branch of science that deals with the study of heredity. All right, heredity is the passing of genes and genetic information from the parents to the offspring. So we already talked about 2 kinds of inherited variation. The first was continuous variation. So these are traits that show a range of possibilities. So for example, skin color, height, hair color, and weight. And then discrete variation was those kinds of traits that have a limited number of variations. You either have it or you don't. So one example we talked about was being able to roll your tongue. You can either roll it or you can't. Another example of discrete variation is blood group. You can be A, B, or the O blood group. Another one is your biological sex, which would be either male or female. All right, so this is just showing here a continuous variation here, a wide range of skin colors. Here is, again, height. We can think of people as tall or short, but people can fall anywhere between those extremes. All right, and here is an example again of discrete variation, the ability to roll your tongue or not being able to roll the tongue. Those would be discrete variation. All right, so here's an example you can try. So bring your hands together and interlock your fingers, okay? Do it right now and see what happens. Which thumb is on top? Then try bringing your hands together with the other thumb on top. So what you'll find is it's actually very uncomfortable. So believe it or not, the tendency to bring your hands together in a particular way, it is a genetic trait. Some people they're going to put their left thumb on top. Other people are going to put their right thumb on top. It says here that unlike most genetic traits that we know of, this one is not a structure that is inherited, but it is a behavior. So question here is, if this simple type of behavior is genetically controlled, what other behavioral traits are also controlled this way? This is just a investigation that we could do, but you can do with your families instead. So normally if we were in a classroom, we could have done this. But basically it's just observing human characteristics. So every person is a collection of characteristics or traits. Some traits occur in distinct forms. For example, when we look at your hairline, it's either going to be smooth or it's going to be pointed, and that pointed is called a widow's peak. So basically this was just doing some observations. So again, you can do it with your families. One is mid-digital hair, so having hair in between basically your nail and the knuckle, so having that mid-digital hair. The tongue, being able to roll your tongue or not rolling your tongue. Your thumb, it's either bent back or it's straight. Another one are earlobes. They are either detached or it's attached. And then the hairline, it's smooth or pointed. So it'd be interesting to do that with your families at home. All right, so next we're going to talk about dominant or recessive traits. So a dominant trait, so think of that word dominant. So this type of trait, it's an inherited trait that shows up in the offspring. So for example, tongue rolling is a dominant trait. So if one parent is able to roll their tongue and the other parent is not able to roll their tongue, the child will be able to roll their tongue, all right, because it's a dominant trait. It will show up when mixed with a recessive trait. So in that tongue rolling example, the non-rolling of the tongue would be a recessive trait, all right? So when a recessive trait is mixed with genes for a dominant trait, the recessive trait will not show up in the offspring. Okay, so it's an inherited trait that will only show up in the offspring if both parents passed on the genes for that trait. All right, so if two parents were not able to roll their tongue, then the offspring will not be able to roll their tongue. But if one parent is able to roll their tongue, the other parent cannot roll their tongue, the dominant trait will show up, so the child will be able to roll their tongue. All right, so continuing with dominant or recessive, another example here is brown eyes versus blue eyes. So in general, brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes, but eyes come in many shades of blue, brown, and even green. Hazel is another eye color. It's a mixture of green and brown. Okay, but generally, brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. And here is some more examples of dominant versus recessive. So a cleft chin is dominant. No cleft is recessive. A widow's peak is dominant. Not having the widow's peak is recessive. And dimples are dominant. No dimples are recessive. Having the darker brown black hair is dominant over blonde hair. Freckles are dominant over no freckles. Brown eyes are dominant over blue or gray eyes. And then the free earlobe is dominant versus the attached earlobe, which is recessive. So those are just some more examples. So your earlobe is either free or it is attached. It's not going to be in between. Okay, so people they often assume that if a trait is widespread in a population, like if there's a high frequency of it, then it must be dominant. But dominance and frequency, they're not the same thing. So the frequency of a trait, it can vary from population to population. So for example, in some populations, almost everyone has blue eyes and blonde hair, even though they're recessive traits. Other populations are mostly people with brown eyes and black hair. Another example here is having 6 fingers, which is called polydactyly. It's actually a dominant trait, but it's actually relatively rare in human populations. All right, so
I just looked that up.
So just looking at another example here in black bears, the Kermode bear of British Columbia. This is a rare type of black bear, Ursus americanus. So this black bear has white fur. It's a recessive trait. So that means 2 parents had the recessive gene and passed it on to the offspring. All right, let's just pause here and take a look at this video.
to see by the dawn's early light.